All right. With that, hello, everyone. Welcome to Accessible PDFs Forums, hosted by the Maryland Department of Disabilities Assistive Technology Program, specifically the IT Accessibility Initiative. My name is Stephen. I will be your speaker today. Usual housekeeping items. We have captioning available today, so if you would like to, you can enable that from the main menu ribbon in the Zoom meeting room. I will be taking questions either in the Q&A or in chat throughout the presentation, but try to hold on because hopefully I will address your question before we get to it. But feel free to ask at any point and I'll try and keep my eye on chat and Q&A to answer those. I do want to apologize in advance. I am getting over something, so I still have a bit of a cough, so I might be cutting out at points, and I'll try to mute myself ahead of time if I catch it, but there might be just a little extra noise, so just apologies in advance. With that, you should have gotten an email around 11 o'clock today with today's materials. The materials will be sent out again along with the recording, as well as the completed version of the form that will generate during the session. So keep an eye out for that, and hopefully we won't have any issues today. With that, let's go ahead and get started. So first, a quick refresher about how Adobe PDFs work. So the Adobe Suite uses what they call tags. And these are definitions of elements for interpretation by other software. So, someone and a coworker did not get the materials. I apologize if you registered after 11, you probably didn't get the email. I grabbed the registrant list at that time. If not, as I mentioned, I will send them out after the session, so you should get them then. If you don't get them within a couple days, please email us. You can email us at, someone else did not get it. Okay, well, I apologize to all of you who did not get it. As I mentioned, though, I will send them out again. If when you registered, you got your email there, I should be able to send it to you then. If you didn't get it or you don't get it in the next couple of days, please email us at this address, mdod.nva@maryland.gov, and I'll make sure that you get the materials along with the recording. Thank you. So as I was mentioning, the tags are what tell other programs this is an image, or this is a heading, or this is a paragraph. This is really important for assistive technology because it needs those definitions in order to communicate that to the user through whatever method it's using, like a screen reader. It needs to know this is an image, so it needs to read the alt text to the user, and it needs to tell them this is an image, or if they're trying to search for specific things like links, they can filter through the document in that manner. So tags read very similar to HTML. There's a lot of overlap between the two, but there are some differences. Adobe has the paragraph, H1, they have table, they have figure, and HTML has, again, P for paragraph, H1 for level 1 heading, table for a table, but it uses IMG or image for images, whereas Adobe calls them figures. Okay, sorry, just saw something in the captioning, or not the captioning, in the chat. Anyway, so there are some differences. If you want to know more, you can either find that list in Adobe's help section or in just looking through a PDF, or you can view some of our older webinars that go into basic document accessibility, where we cover things like how Word creates a document or how PDFs can just be made accessible, that kind of thing. But it's very important that we put these tags in, because otherwise assistive technology is going to struggle to interpret the document correctly. Because while things like JAWS or NVDA have OCR capability, and can scan the document, do some reading, it has to make its best guess. So the user might not get the information in the order you want them to read it in, or they might not get, it might skip parts, or it might misinterpret something as just a table instead of a form that they're supposed to fill out. So again, if you want to know more about this, you can visit our website for more information. You can go to our YouTube channel. We have other presentations about this. We also provide links to other resources regarding this, section 508.gov, W3C. A lot of people have spoken about this subject. There's a lot of material out there for you. So now let's talk about today and what we're going to be doing. So the first thing is we want to explain what makes a fillable PDF form accessible. Then we're going to work through the example document to explain the process from start to finish, or as close as we can get within today's time, and then show strategies for dealing with some of Adobe's nuances. There are times when it either takes some trickery or some workarounds in order to make things work, because the way sometimes Adobe interprets a document isn't how you want a user to interpret a document, or sometimes we're dealing with technology and things just get stuck, or it decides it should be this way and you're trying to tell it the opposite and it's like, no. And that's where we have to try and play around and figure out what's going to work at least well enough. So here are the key rules, the things you should remember before and during the process. You want to start with an accessible PDF or another document type. So you want to be working with as clean and as organized a document as possible to start with, whether that's you start in Word and set up the document like we have done today, or you want to start with a PDF you've already remediated. The reason for that is because trying to do it after the fact when you've already created the form makes it harder when you're trying to assign the new tags to the form fields and you're trying to connect those into a reading order that's non-existent. So I've always found it easier to start with something I've already remediated or set up to be accessible ahead of time. The second thing, for any form, labels are critical. You need them to tell users what information you want them to put in that edit field, or if they're saying yes or no to a radio button question, that kind of thing. You can do this via properties. So for Adobe PDFs, you can either double click the field and it'll open a dialog, or you can use the properties button that I will show you. It is on the right side, at least in the screenshot on screen. So you also want a visual label. That's usually going to be your text. This can be a little bit tricky to set up, unlike HTML, where we can kind of associate them. You can't really do that with PDFs. So that's why we need to put it in both separate visual text and then also in the properties menu of the form field itself for each one. Second thing, it's really important to notify users of any format or character limits. There's a lot of these kind of settings you can put onto a form field, but you usually want to tell people that it's going to either turn into this or that they need to enter it in a specific manner. You usually want to let people know ahead of time on the form itself that this is going to happen, or that, whatever format you use, kind of a standard convention is to put a number in parentheses after a label that says, in this case, 2 for the state. But in the instructions, you would tell people the number after a label is indicating the number of characters the form field allows. Or for like a phone number, you want to give them the format that it's going to use. In this case, it's going to use 3 digits, then a hyphen, then 3 digits, then a hyphen, then 4 digits. So notify users of what's expected to be put into that field. Next, you want to manually assign the reading order in both forms and in the accessibility tool. These are 2 different reading orders. So the one in the forms tool is what's used when you're just pressing tab going from field to field to field. This affects any user who isn't using something like a screen reader or voice control that isn't anyone who's using a keyboard. The standard behavior for the program, or for most programs really, for things like screen readers and such, if they're sorry. Apologies. If they're in edit mode, where they're going to be focusing on elements that they can interact with, then again, tab will move them from field to field to field. So it's going to follow the forms reading order. If they're instead in browse mode, or something like the voice control software is in use, and they want to select a label, or they want to select instructions or something, or move around, then they're going to be using the reading order that's set in the accessibility, because that's the entire document. So that's why it's necessary to look at it in both, because depending on how they're interacting with the document, it's going to use one or the other, and you want to make sure they're both correct. Finally, you want to tag and assign the reading order after you've created the form. Reason for that is because Adobe is, you've already generated the first reading order when you made an accessible PDF ahead of time. But when you're assigning the reading order, you're having to put in these new elements into the midst of that. So it's usually easiest to do it all together at the end, and make sure that when you're doing this with the form fields, that they're moving into the correct place. Usually you want to go label, form field, label, form field. Sometimes that doesn't always work out depending on how it's set up. I'll show you guys a trick I found that helps make it easier. But there have been occasions where Adobe wants to group all the form fields together, or move them before the labels, what have you. So sometimes it can be tricky and messy to do. Now, I do want to mention specifically using tables to make your forms. I really strongly recommend you don't use them. The reason for that is they often interfere with the reading order in PDFs, because Adobe is going to try and maintain that layout or that setup. So if you create it in Word or something and you send it to PDF, and let's say you've taken away the outlines, so visually it doesn't look like a table. It doesn't, you don't see it there, but it's nice and orderly and in columns. Adobe is going to say, oh wait, there's still a table here, and it'll put that back into a table. And because it's interpreting that as a table where it wants to read it by column and by row, it's going to fight you whenever you're trying to assign a manual reading order of, you want to read this column, then this column. Instead, it's going to want to do row, row, column, column. And it'll also start adding, if you have headings, or it'll start adding like row 1, cell 3, or, column 3. And it adds a lot of extra information that screen readers are going to spit out. It's going to make it harder for voice control software to pick out that field, because now it's not just the field, but it's a field inside this table. And it could just be challenging. They can also be a little bit annoying to remove in PDFs, because you kind of have to remove every part of it manually, and you can't just delete the entire thing, because then that delete the tags for the fields, and you'd have to redo it, and then it's going to try and make it a table again. And so it's just easier if you don't use tables. That doesn't mean you can't. It's just a lot harder to deal with in document form than it is in HTML, where you have attributes that can make it interpret as not a table. So that's just my personal recommendation. It's a recommendation of a lot of accessibility specialists, but I can't tell you what to do. So if you really want to use a table, just be aware that you're going to have to deal with remediating that out to make it easier for users. Now, we're going to move on to the actual demonstration today. So I set up that word. Apologies again. All right. So I set up this Word document. I hope you guys can see it on screen. This is, if you've been to a previous one in the spring that was about accessible PDF challenges, it should look familiar to you. There are some differences though, in that I added like the table down here and such. But so we have a Word document here. I've by and large made this already accessible. You know, we have headings to use for each section. The rest of this is text. I can check this using either here. Now, if you have Office 365, which I just got recently, you can use this tool that's here where it's always running the accessibility tester. It's in the bottom ribbon where it tells you how many pages and words you have in your document and other settings like that. Or you can go to File and Info and Inspect Document, and you can check accessibility. That also brings up the accessibility checker. Great place to start. If you notice, there's a couple warnings here. That's because the table I created, since I'm using it for a presentation, I don't necessarily want headers in it. There's also the warning of a split cell here because I set this up for, you know, a yes, no radio button, because that's visually how I want it to look. However, that's a problem. That is a problem typically for screen reader users. So that's why it gives that warning. So we're just going to ignore that for now. But if you notice, those are the only errors in here. So other than that, this document should be pretty good to go. There are a few things I wanted to point out with this that I have done. First off, in the Good Forum creation example, I have for each of these parts, first name, last name, phone, address, I have, in order to create the amount of space I wanted, I changed the margins or the spacing between lines to 3.0. This gives me enough room to draw the form field I want there, rather than putting in a bunch of tabs or enters or, you know, spaces, that kind of thing. The reason for that is because since spaces or tab indentations or pressing enter to create new paragraphs, those are technically characters. And while we don't see anything there, the program says there's a character here. So Adobe's going to try and tag that. You can still do that. Like if you notice, like this space in here, that's all created by tab. So when we go into a PDF, we're going to see probably something there marked up. They'll have to delete. The reason I'm just saying to try and use the margins here is just to save yourself a little extra time and effort later on. It's not a big deal if you don't do that, as long as you have enough space visually for what you want. Oh, someone has raised their hand. Okay. Give me a moment to bring up the participants list. Okay, you should be able to talk if you need to. You probably will need to unmute yourself though. Or if you prefer, you can write out your question in either chat or Q&A. Okay. If you need to, you can either raise your hand again, we could try and get that working again, or you can write out your question in chat or Q&A, and I'll try and address it as we move on. Okay. Thank you. In the meantime, if you notice in my instructions, I've stated here You can use all fields, have number in parentheses to indicate the number of characters allowed in the field. Please fill out all fields marked required. Now I should also put here that I'm using asterisk. The reason for that is just because even though it is standard convention that we probably all recognize, it's still best to be flat out and specific about what you're using. Okay, now we see how you change the margins for the vertical spacing. How did you do it for the horizontal spacing between the fields? First name and last name. Great question. So for this one, for this part up here, I just press tab. So if I delete this here, you notice that is just going to pull it back. So that's one way. Like I said, that's probably going to, in a PDF, mark this up as either blank space or add something extra here that we might have to deal with. However, later on, I've used a 2-column layout down here. So what I did down here was I wrote out these 4 parts, and then in layout, I went to columns, which is the 4th button in the ribbon, and I changed this to 2. So that's another way to do this. If you want to add columns, you know, I can add a 3rd one if I want like a short column or something on the right for like checkboxes, I can use left to right. I would encourage you guys to experiment, see what works for you in your form. There's always a lot of options you can kind of do with this kind of thing. So that's a couple different ways to do it. It really comes down to A, what look do you want? And then B, you might have to deal with, you know, getting rid of some blanks that are in the midst of your document when we get to the PDF. So thank you. That was a very good question. All right. Next thing I want to point out is, I'm sorry, guys. Next thing is I didn't put any kind of underline or underscore in here. The reason I do that is because I just do that with the form fields themselves when I'm in PDF, just because I prefer how that looks, because that'll keep it directly to the size of the field and where I don't have to try and matches up. Thank you. I appreciate that. I just got over it. So this is just, you know, the lingering thing, but hopefully it goes away shortly. But thank you. But yeah, so I don't typically draw like the underlines and or underscores or whatever to try and mark out the fields visually, because I will use the PDF forms for that instead. However, that sometimes creates an issue for Adobe, because then Adobe doesn't know what to look for. So I tend to just do these manually because I just find it easier, honestly. But that's just because I've done this so many times. But you should be aware that Adobe is going to look for things like either cells or underscores. Like if I drew a line here, Adobe is going to use that line to put a form field there. It might not do that this time. So just be aware of that. That's how Adobe works. If you feel more comfortable, you can set up, you know, you can put lines here, fill in this with an underline or underscore. You know, I can add a line here that'll add this cell here around that space, that kind of thing, using the draw borders tool. So you can do that if you want Adobe to create the form for you. Depending on what kind of document setup you have, you can do that. I just prefer not to. So other than that, now I should, also looking at this, probably put here yes, no's, because otherwise I am not going to have actual text here. So there we go. So I can either add it here or I can add it later. It is dependent on what you want to do. It's usually easier to just do it in Word and then do it later. But I'll show you guys how to edit a PDF and add these in later too. So we have our basic forms here. First thing we're going to do is we're going to go to File and then Save as Adobe PDF. And then this is going to give you the usual where you want to save it. And then I'm going to just put on the desktop to make it easier. Very important, you want to go to Options. You want to make sure this third checkbox, Enable Accessibility and Refill with Tagged Adobe PDF, is checked. If you don't do this, all the work that you've done to make this accessible, any headings, any alt text on images, any of that is going to be wiped out. It's not going to be there. So save yourself the headache and make sure this option is enabled. Once you've done it the first time, it should save it and default to that from then on, but it's always good to check it just to be sure, because you just have to click Options and see this dialog and make sure that that third checkbox is checked. So we'll do that and click Save. It's going to convert to Adobe PDF. And then it's going to pop up on the other screen. So let me pull it over here. Okay, so now we have it open in Adobe. I'm going to move my personal view over onto my other monitor so that's out of the way. Okay, so now we're in Adobe. First thing we want to do is make sure that everything came over correctly. This is the latest version of Acrobat DC or Acrobat Pro, whichever you want to call it. I should mention you do need the paid version, this version, Acrobat Pro, in order to do this work. The free reader doesn't let you have these tools, so just be aware of that fact. If you're working with something else, like another document creator, like Canva or something, you probably have some of these tools available to you, but that's going to be dependent on that program. So be aware of that. So we want to check that everything came through correctly. First thing we can do is on the right here, there is this Z-looking icon, which is how we can view the reading order. So if I click that, as you can see, let me close the tools icon. It will draw these boxes around everything on screen, and it also gives us a list of everything in the reading order. So I can see that it starts with the PDF form creation, then it does the first thing, then it does the list, and then another paragraph, and then what have you. Now, if you notice, there's some paths here, there's an empty cell here. Those are because of the lines drawn here, or these empty spaces in the middle. So it's assigning those extra tags because there's technically characters there. We can see that if we go down to page 2, there's an extra one here at the bottom. That's because there's an extra enter that I put there, and that's why we see that. Which is better to use, export to PDF or save as PDF? I don't think it matters. I always use save as PDF. I think that's actually part of Word because I have Acrobat Pro. I think there's something when you install the Adobe software, it adds a plugin to Word. So I always just use that. I think if you use export to PDF, you should still get that option to add accessibility tags. You know what? Why don't we just pull up Word and just double check that? So if I bring up Word, what I do, file. Now I always do this. I'm going to save as Adobe PDF, but then we can do export, create Adobe PDF. And I'm just going to do an export just to double check this. This is good to know. Options. Okay, it's there again as well. So it doesn't matter apparently, as long as we still get this option and we can enable that accessibility with tagged Adobe PDF. It doesn't matter if you do save as or you export to. So thank you. That was a good question and added to my own knowledge. Just never use print to PDF. Yes, that's very good point. Thank you. Yeah, print to PDF, we'll treat it like a scanned document and we'll just put it out as an image. because it's sending it to a printer. So it's going to come out differently. So thank you. That is very good information to share with everyone. So anyway, we have our order. It looks pretty good. I do want to, in some cases, I probably don't want these blanks and such, so I can probably go ahead and just delete those, or mark them as background elements. You know, in this case, like the one on page 2, I'm just going to delete this one. I would say also just be careful with sometimes how it groups things. I pull up tools and click prepare for accessibility. Now I should mention I dragged and put this up here because I use it all the time. More than likely, you're going to have to click view more to get to the accessibility tool. But you can reorder it and put it up here. So I would say just be aware of how it groups things, because when I open this up, if you notice, it just says display like elements a single block. Sometimes this can actually be a problem. The reason for that is because in cases where like instructions are separated by paragraph, or if you have a really long question followed by, you know, 2 short, you know, yes or no things, it's going to try and treat that as an entire group. Like if you noticed earlier, these were treated as one whole block, and we don't want them to be treated as an entire block because we're going to have form fields interrupting all of these. So it's better for our case that these be separated out. Now, as you notice, that added a bunch of these empty other tags that we probably want to get rid of, because for our purposes, these don't add anything. So I am going to go ahead and clean this up a little bit. I'm going to get rid of those blanks. The pass I still want to keep there, because when I run the accessibility checker, it's probably going to flag those, but the individual blanks, because again, it sees a character. For the record, I'm holding control in order to select multiple things at the same time. It's like any other program. If you hold shift, it'll select everything in a list. If you hold control, it'll select additional individual parts. And I missed one. But pass, I want to keep there. The reason being is because if I run the accessibility check, it'll be like there's still an untagged element there. So instead, what I want to do is open reading order and go to path, and then I want to make it a background artifact. So that way it's still tagged and Adobe won't yell at me, but for a screen reader, it'll say, oh, that's a background element. I can ignore it. So we've done that basic setup, and overall, we're pretty confident in the accessibility of this PDF. So now we can go back and we can click prepare form. Take this document. This is a different, I should mention, this checkbox saying this document requires signatures. So when I click prepare form, it's going to tell me, you know, what file do you want to use for this? In this case, it's going to use the file that's open. Document requiring signatures. It is a different kind of Adobe form. There's 2. So just be aware of that. For our purposes, they're by and large the same. It's just the one that requires signatures is going to use Adobe's signature system that requires a key that you would have to purchase. So for by and large, you're probably not going to be using that. Oh, I didn't save it, so I need to save document. There we go. Now I'll create the form. Okay. Quick question in the chat: how to edit PDF on the iPad or iPhone? That's not something we're going to cover today. And honestly, that's not something I have done much. Typically, I'm working off of a desktop computer. I would assume in order to edit a PDF on either of those things, you're going to need either Adobe Acrobat Pro, if they have a mobile version of it, or you're going to need some other kind of document editor that can interpret those documents. I think Samsung, like I have an Android phone. I think Samsung has a built-in PDF editor. There's probably others available, but that's not something I can go into in much detail today. It's not the scope of today's presentation. So, as you notice, it created form fields based on the table because it saw boxes there to use. Now, it didn't create them in the good form field example because, again, I didn't put any underlines or drawings there. So we're going to have to do all that manually. But it lists out all the fields here on the right that it's created. And this is the reading order for the form on itself. So we have, first name, last name, address, email, US citizen, but as you notice, it tried to use the US citizen again because it had no other context information. Same for state here. So these four we don't need. We'll just go ahead and get rid of those. I just put in the blank rows to show the tag fields later on, but I'm going to delete these because we don't need them. By and large, Adobe tries to use text fields. As of like the last, I would say 6 months, their system has gotten better in identifying things. So like in the case of where I have yes, no here, if I had yes, no up here, it probably would have put in radio buttons, but that's not always a guarantee. And it's more than likely never going to add like drop downs. Like for the state, we probably want to add drop down field here instead of letting people type it in. So just be aware of that. So I'm going to go ahead and delete these because they're not the type I want. Now, I'm going to start with the first fields that it's already created that I'm going to keep. I'm going to double click the first one for first name. If you notice, it put it's the name in both name and tooltip. That's what you want it to do. The reason for that is because you want to have that available on the tooltip for when you hover over it, for users just to have, again, that information. You want them to match because also things like screen readers and such will use name when it first encounters it, but then we'll use tooltip if they press help or if they press the active cursor button or something like that. So it's important to have these matching. So we have name and tooltip. Well, that's what we want. We have appearance. This is where you can add the border color. You can change the kind of border it is. You can say, line style and such. So when we create it down here, I'm going to put that on. But you can also, put in fill colors. I think it's good to put in fill colors personally. The reason for that is because this default color you'll see when you edit a form, if you've ever seen a fillable PDF form, but it will go away when you click in it. So I personally think it's a good idea to put in a fill color just so people can always identify that it's a form field, but it does mean that it's going to try and print that, and that can be sometimes a problem. So be aware of that and try to try to use something that's very muted, like, this pale orange or the slightly gray one. I sometimes use the blue, but you need something that's going to have good contrast with whatever text color you use, which hopefully you'll be defaulting to the black. But that might be a problem if you try to print out the form. So it's a little bit of a hit or miss. So if you intend people to print out the form all the time, you probably don't want to put in a color fill. If it's something you like email to someone and expect them to email back to you, you might want to then. Also, I should mention for options here, you should go to here and be aware of some of these. So by default, it's typically going to scroll long text. Usually don't want that to happen. You know, if you put an unlimited amount of characters, they can just type whatever and it'll just continuously scroll, but visually you'll never see that, especially if you print it out. So be aware of that fact. This is also where you can add the limits of number of characters in the options tab. You can also, if you have like a big text field that you're using for like a paragraph answer or something, you want to use multi-line so that instead it'll fill out like how a Word document would, instead of just endlessly scrolling to the right or left or just stopping when they hit that end point. So multi-line is very good for those kind of things. Finally, the last one I want to show you is the formats tab and properties. This is where you can select different looks for different types of things. Actually, let me do this in the email. I think there's a format here where if I go to special, okay, it's not here, but in the formats here, you have you can select the categories. So there's numbers, where you can say, are there decimal places? Is it a currency? There's date, where you can select the type of date, where you can do month, day, 2 digits of year. You can do 2 digits of month, day, and year, or you could do 2 digits of month, day, 4 digits of year, whatever. I would recommend that whatever format you choose, you then put in the parentheses of your label. So in this case, we would do next to this, since if this was a date, we would do month, day, year, because that is the format we selected. Then we would copy that and put it into our tooltip so that, again, it matches. So that's how you should be handling formats and explaining that, and just making sure that people are aware that that is the format, or that that is what your instructions are saying. I will talk about the common properties in a bit, but then for creating a form, oops, didn't need to do that. Apologies. If you click any of the text, it then goes into the editing text options, which you can do. I just haven't fully learned how to do it, or switch back to it in the newest version. Anyway, so we have different form types here we can use. So text field, which is the default. You have checkboxes, you have radio buttons, you have drop downs. So let's create radio buttons here for our US citizen. Now, if you notice, I've created one here, and it puts it as group 1, choice 1. So the way radio buttons work is the name and tooltip is the group. So this is how it keeps, options together. So in this case, I want the name and tooltip to be the question. So are you a US citizen? With our tooltip. Then I want to go to options tab. And then I could change the different style. Do I want it to be a circle? Do I want it to be a check? Whatever, however you want it to look, that's up to you. But the radio button choice is where I put it, the individual option, in this case, yes. Now, if I create a second button, it's going to keep it in this group, and it's going to do that from then on. And I'll go to options, and then I want this one to be no. But it's always going to have the previous group that you created. So if I want to create a new question using radio buttons, I don't need to make sure that I change the general name and tooltip for the new option, the new button or new question. So that's how I'll create those in here. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down here. I'm going to quickly put in some more form fields for the good example here. And I can just go ahead and put these here. Now, since I'm just clicking, it's just creating the default size box. If I use the select tool in the tools panel here, I can change the size of these however I want. So I can do, things like that, where I'm making it longer, taller, whatever. I can also, if I scroll back to the top of the preparer form, you have a line. So I can, make sure all of these, if I hold control and I select each of them, the last one I select is the one it's going to base off of it. And I can use the left align to put them all in alignment. I can then reselect first name, last name. I can select the first name again as the last one, and I can align them to each other so that everything, kind of looks proper rather than just kind of haphazardly clicked onto there. But the reason I'm doing it this way is just so that I can get this done quickly, because we don't have terribly much more time. So I'm going to quickly create these. If you notice, it's the same, it's a separate group. That's because we're on a new page, but it still has the same question. That's expected behavior. If they were on the same page, it would put them into the same group. Usually what I do is I will try to either put like, a secondary question or some other kind of identifier in the label in order to explain why are these different questions. So let me quickly give these labels. Do appearance. Like I said, I like to add a color. Oops, just use black. That's fine. Line color, thin. Line style, I usually use underlined. Fill color. So that's what I like to do. One other thing I like to do, and I probably should have mentioned or done this earlier. I had to reinstall the program, which is why this is different, is now that I've added that style, I can go here and I can say use current properties as new defaults. In the context menu, it's the last option. That's really helpful because now any other text field I create will use that setting as its default. So I don't have to do this every time. So I'm just going to do a couple of these for the sake of time. But oops, I also realized that I should go to options. I should say limit of 25 characters. Great. Don't want that. Do that. 25. I can go to phone options. I don't want to scroll along text limit. I want it to 10 characters. We can also go to format here. And I'll go special and I'll use phone number. And that way, whenever someone enters numbers in here, it's going to try and display it as a phone number. If you use the options for social security number or arbitrary mask, that does the whole *** thing when you enter data in here. Now, the key thing with that is if you just send people the file, it's likely not going to work correctly. Oops. Sorry, I pressed Control S out of habit, and I need to make sure whenever you create a form, it's going to treat it as a separate file. So I need to make sure to save it, because otherwise it's not going to save all my work. But I'm very much in the habit of pressing Control S after a few changes. So good habit for people to have, but be aware of that. In this case, since this is technically a separate form, it doesn't matter. But if you had two questions that are, the same, or it's like first name for the first applicant, but you have like a co-applicant or something, you can add kind of identifiers in the description. So if this was for a second person, I can say like co-applicant, or something like second applicant or something like that. Just some kind of identifier in the label that lets people know this is a new question for a different person. And it also helps the program separate questions from each other, because otherwise it's going to be like, there's multiple of the same thing. Now, how do I, identify those? You also have to do this again here, because if you notice now it has choice 2. If I didn't do that, it would treat those as 2 separate questions, and then the radio buttons wouldn't work right. Now for the checkboxes here, we have please check one of the following. Because that's just short, I can just add it to the description here. And this is something that I am not 100% sure of what is the best way to do this, because I've gotten different answers from different people. My suggestion, and the one that's probably been the majority, is to create an instructional box that states this instruction and then put each of these options as just that option. So you can do what I just did, where you have the instruction as part of the checkbox. Or you can do the second option where, I'm sorry, we can add a second text field here. We want it to be small because we don't want, we really just want AT to find it. We don't want people actually filling it out or trying to click in it or whatever. But I'm going to double click it to get its properties. And I'm going to just put in here, please check one of the following. So this is, oops. Sometimes when you press tab to move from name to tooltip, sometimes it'll treat that as you're in here and it's going to jump to the next thing. It happens. So this is a field that I want someone to read, but I don't want them necessarily putting data into. So on the general tab, there's common properties, and I want to change this to visible but doesn't print. This is so that it's visible in the program, and so AT can find it, because if I choose hidden or hidden but printable, the screen reader isn't going to find it. It's going to be hidden from them. But if they print this form out, I don't want them to necessarily have a bunch of like extra little colored boxes behind questions. So that's the reason I say choose visible but doesn't print. Then I want to mark it as read only. Reason for that is so that they can read it. And if they're just pressing tab to move from interactive element to interactive element, they'll be able to read the instructions while they're just moving through the form. So a user who is in browse mode in a screen reader can read the instructions separately, but then read the form field, but then they can also, but someone who's in edit mode and is just moving from field to field isn't going to miss out on anything. Like I said, it's very dependent on the user and their preferences. I recommend using the instructional fields for really long questions that might have like a very short answer, or in cases where you have a lot of different ways you're interacting with things, or different instructions on how to fill it out. And that way people aren't going to have to like switch modes in order to go back and read instructions and what have you. If it's a very basic form and they're kind of all operating the same, you probably don't need to do this then. I should mention also there's a required checkbox here that's really good for telling people that something is required rather than just the label. I should also put the asterisk in the label to follow the convention I laid out in the instructions so that users understand this is required. Things like that, or like the e-signature field, only work if you use Adobe's like send form to someone, where then it'll be like, you can't edit this, or you can't leave without signing it, that kind of thing. Otherwise, they're just gonna work like regular text fields, and it's going to operate differently. So just be aware of that fact, that some of these fields, their behaviors are dependent on using Adobe system to send it rather than just sending them the PDF file. So now that we've done that, and we've done our basic layout here, we can save. We can go up here in the fields list. We want to make sure that this is in the order we want people to read it in. In this case, we want to move our instructional field up above the checkboxes so that people read that first. I'm not going to fill in the rest of these. You can do that on your own when you're practicing with this. But you can just click and drag these and move these around as you want here. So, we have first name, we want last name. It's going to put these in order that I created them, but it's going to put them after what has already existed. So if any of these fields had existed beforehand, anything new is just going to be at the bottom of your list. So you need to click and drag and move them around. So now that we've done that, we need to go to prepare for accessibility again. And now we need to tag them. Now there is an auto tag form fields button. I have never gotten it to work. So I'm going to show you guys how to do this manually. And then you can go from there and determine, and see how well it works for you. So I want to use the reading order button to open this dialog. And if you notice, it's grouping, first name and last name together. We want those to be separate, but since we're doing these form fields, we're going to make this, it'll separate them out for us. Now we can just click and drag a box around the first form field and just try and tag that as a form field. But I have found that if you click and drag around the label as well as the field, now it's adding those extra tabs here, if you notice, because it thinks there's characters there. And I click form field this way, it puts it into the correct order already. I don't have to go back and click and drag them in the reading order list. So if I show the panel on the right here, I don't have to click and drag and move this around again. It's already put it in the order I want. The second thing is it will still tag this as a form field and still tag that as text. So it just makes things easier. Why that works that way, I don't know. And now that I've done this, if you notice, there's now this blank field here. So I need to get rid of that. So I can just go down to here, click 25, delete that. And as you notice, there's now two form fields here in my reading order list, but they're where I want them already. So I can just go through and tag all of these again, doing that. For things like the radio form field, I can click and drag around the whole thing, click form field, and it'll separate them out as well. Now, if you notice, yes and no are actually not. So in some cases, it doesn't do this. So I need to mark that as text. And this I will have to reorder manually. So this I won't have to do like that. And then I want to move this. And as you notice, it's now starting to fight me and put this into an order I don't want. This is where I have to go and do this manually in the tag tree structure. And I have to go here. So I have the form fields, and then I have to find the correct one. So I have this paragraph form and this one. So I have to go back in and start editing the tag fields manually. That isn't something I would typically show. So if you want more information about this, please reach out to me. And I can either keep a demonstration or I can refer you to some of our previous presentations on the tags tree structure. But this is the kind of thing that the tag system is going to fight me on this. We are at time though, so I don't want to go into more detail. I apologize. Usually I would have been able to fit that in, but between my coffee and everything, we were out of time. So if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in chat now. I'll give a few minutes to answer them as best as I can. I will clean this up a little bit before I send it to you guys after the fact. And I will also try and maybe add a little extra recording or something else to give you guys a little more information about the tag structure and how to deal with that. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. The recording will be on our YouTube channel. As I said, since I have your email from registration, I will send an email to everyone on that list with the link, but you can go to our user is MDTAP video, I believe, or you can go to our mdtap.org and use the YouTube link there to get to it. So I apologize again. We've normally gotten through everything. I will do a separate recording to explain like the tables and how to clean those up and such, but this can take quite a while. So I will make sure to get that information to you guys after. Thank you again today to our captioner. As always, is appreciated. All right, if there's no other questions, I'm going to stop the recording.